fast forward and bring you up to speed. Last year, on July 10th, my son reported that a staff at the Bancroft School tried to choke him. Now, that was kind of crazy because no one had told me about it, and I didn't find out about this report until 2 days later, which was a red flag. So when I spoke with the person at the school regarding this incident, she said, "Oh, well, we don't usually report to the parent right away. We have to get the facts and we want to look at the video." And she said, everything came out fine. There was no restraint or anything. So I was like, okay, but I wanted to speak to him because this was my first time finding out about any of this. She said I had to wait until he got out of school and he would call me. And I said, no, I want to speak to him right now. She says, no, you can't do that. So I contacted the police to do a well-being check on my son because I'm in Maryland and he's in New Jersey. And I'm just finding out about this. The night of the incident, I received a call from the staff. And it just so happened to be the staff that my son reported who told me about, oh, there was an incident, your son was banging the van and broke some of the windows. He didn't know anything else, never said anything about a restraint, never said anything about putting his hands around his neck, nothing. I asked to speak to my son that night, and all he did was scream. I don't want to talk about it. So everything was now making sense from that night to that day that I got the report. So a police officer went out to the school to do a well-being check, and he said, oh, everything was fine. There was no report of a restraint. There was no documentation of a restraint. Your son was fine. So I'm like, okay, well, that's good. So the following day, the detective contacted me and said, hey, I'm about to go over to the school, check out the video. He called me after he had left the school and said that everything seemed to be fine. There was no documentation of a restraint, but the school would not allow him to see the video. That was strange, really bizarre, because that was part of their process. The law in the state of New Jersey and in the state of Maryland is that if there is a suspected case of abuse, schools are required to comply with the law enforcement. So I thought it was pretty strange that they did not comply. The detective told me that they would only allow the parent to see the video. So I said, okay. So I had a friend to come pick up my son to keep him for the weekend until I got there. So that morning I was on my way to the Bancroft School and I received a call from Bancroft's risk management attorney who informed me that I could not see the video. It had to be court ordered. That didn't make sense. Because if nothing was on it, like they said, what was the big deal? Why couldn't the detective see it? So that was a double red flag. So I contacted the detective to let him know I was in town and that they said I could not see this video. And he asked me, did I want him to subpoena the video? And I said, absolutely. Meanwhile, my son and I were talking and I got multiple verbal reports from him, which were consistent each time. He informed me that the staff who he had reported was still working on the grounds. I thought that was kind of strange because typically when you're doing an investigation, the staff is put on administrative leave during the investigation until the final result. So the fact that the staff was still at the school, he was afraid to go back because he feared retaliation. So I took my son home. So that evening after we got home, I contacted the residential unit to let them know I would not be bringing my son back until I received the final report from the internal investigation. When I called, it just so happened the gentleman who my son reported answered the phone. And I took that opportunity, like any special needs parent would, to ask him more questions. But I asked him, would it be okay if I recorded our conversation for the record? He was like, sure, so I did. I asked the guy, I said, hey, my son told me that you tried to choke him. Can you tell me what happened in your own words? So he explained, oh, no, that's not what happened. I would never do that. I never put my hands on him. I would never do that. I'm a supervisor. That's not, my role. And he was just telling me how he never had to use a restraint. Red flag number 3. Now, at that time, the detective had not yet seen the video. So I didn't know what to expect. About a week later, the detective contacted me and said, hey, I'm on my way back over to Bancroft to look at the video. They called me and said I could come back. And I'm like, well, wait, I thought you subpoenaed the video. Did they send the video? So I asked him, did you get a copy of the video from the school? He said no, but they called me back to come and view it. Is that even legal? So after he reviewed the video, he called me back and gave me a detailed report. In his report, he mentioned that there was a moment when there was like a bear hug type of deal. He was very careful with his words. He didn't say restraint, kind of like he was trying to protect Bancroft. But the bottom line is there was an unreported restraint. Meanwhile, I really had not heard anything from Howard County. So soon after, I got a copy of Bancroft's final investigation report, which concluded that there was no substantiated evidence. I was shocked because the staff said he never touched him, and the report said that there was a restraint. Then I got a copy of the police reports, where the first report said that there was no restraint. There was basically no documented restraint. And the detective's report basically said there was a restraint or a bear hug. So somebody was lying. So at that point, basically, I let Howard County know I'm not sending my son back there. But my thought was they were going to at least investigate. Now, when I looked at the detective's report, it was not as detailed as what we talked about. It was interesting because his report just stated that he subpoenaed the video, but it didn't say anything about Bancroft not allowing him to see the video initially, therefore he had to subpoena the video. And it didn't say anything about Bancroft not complying with the subpoena and he had to go back to the school to see the video. That was kind of insane. So the detective closed his case, even though there were two conflicting police reports. I did not understand that. Bancroft basically closed its case. I find out that Bancroft actually did not even report this incident to the state until 8 days later, probably because they didn't think I was going to come to New Jersey to try to see this video. So Howard County was made aware of all of this that was going on. For me personally, I would think that with all of these red flags, you would want to investigate. Plus, Howard County's policy 1030 regarding abuse and neglect states that an investigation would be performed. I understand that he wasn't actually in Howard County, but he was a Howard County student in a non-public school at an out-of-state placement, and they were responsible for his care. So they needed to know what went on. There was no investigation. So meanwhile, my son is at home and I am struggling because I didn't plan on him being at home. There was no schedule, no plan in place, no daily routine, nothing. And he had depression because he missed being at school with his friends, but he was afraid to go back. He also was having behaviors from the residual thoughts of the abuse. And I reached out to Howard County and said, hey, look, can we get home and hospital for him? Some behavior supports for me at home because I don't know what to do. This whole situation was just dropped in my lap and I have no support. And I don't know how to manage these behaviors because he's typically at the school. And I was not planning for him to come home until that following year. So at the same time, I requested counseling service for him because he was having like nightmares and residual thoughts of this whole trauma. And he already had pre-existing trauma. So this was new trauma on top of his pre-existing trauma. And he was just like a mess, like so depressed because he wanted to be at school with his friends, but he was afraid to go back. So I asked for counseling services. Now, according to Howard County's policy 1030 regarding abuse and neglect, it says that any student who reports abuse, witnesses abuse, experiences abuse, they are all entitled to counseling services through the school. So that's all I was asking for. My son was a Howard County student and had all the rights and privileges of any student in that county. He was denied all services.